it's Diana Van Blaricom, ROI's VP of ERP Strategy. And I am here today talking with Tom Peluso, who is one of our project managers in our PMO. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Diana. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me today. You know, we've been talking to the project management team around common points of failure. So earlier this year, ERP News did a survey, a little research study that they did about the common points of failure. And so we've been talking about those different aspects. There's a whole series. So if you go out to roihs.com and click on Thought Leadership, you can get to the series. And I wanted to talk to you today, Tom, about kind of the communication side of projects, right? So when we think about the importance of communication within the project. We talk about, the goals of the project and what that strategic vision is. So I wanted to kind of get your real world experience about why clearly defined and communicated goals and project objectives are important. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons why those are important, right, and actually critical to the project. I mean, for starters, being able to define the purpose of the project is important because it sets everybody on the right path in terms of what an organization's goals and objectives are. It sets the proper expectations for the project so that everybody understands what they're working toward. It serves as a signpost or series of signposts to help guide the project team and executive committee through that project so that at any given step or point in the project, they can understand where they are and whether they're aligned or not aligned with the project's goals. And it really helps reduce or minimize communication issues. Confusion that can come out of not understanding goals and objectives or miscommunication on what those objectives are supposed to be. Once you've communicated those goals and objectives to the team, it helps everybody fully understand what they're supposed to be doing as part of the project. And any miscommunication or discrepancies in terms of those objectives can be discussed with the formalized goals as a reference point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that reference point is important when we think about the roles and responsibilities, right? These projects typically have a lot of people involved, right? We talk about it takes a village. Well, it kind of does, especially if you're replacing the entire ERP, right? So having those goals and objectives, I think, as the forefront of every activity that you do is important, and it helps clarify those roles and responsibilities. In some projects, we have multiple different work teams, right? We've got finance and supply chain and HR. You may have ROI and our team. We might have some folks from Infor. We might have folks from other firms that are on this journey, with us on a project. And I, in some cases, we've even written those things on the whiteboard in the corner and said, "Do not erase," right? So we can always refer back to it. And I think it does keep people focused. Talk to me a little bit about some of the tools we can use, right? So we talked about having it in the first and foremost, but that formal documentation, we talk about best practices of project management. What are some of the ways that we formally document that so that we have, number one, a mechanism to communicate to people? Is there a document they can read and refer back to? Where does that lie in the project management scheme of things?
I think typically the project charter has goals and objectives that are clearly defined. It's a lot of times a starting point for the project and how the project is going to be conducted. So I think defining those as part of the project charter gives the overall view into what the goals and objectives are going to be. Statement of work will contain goals and objectives as well. Mm-hmm. And those are really the formalized documentation of what the goals and objectives are. Mm-hmm. Those get communicated a number of different ways, but those are really the starting point. So mm-hmm. You can use your kickoff meeting, you can use your initial planning meetings, you can use phase reviews all through the project, and really communicate what those goals and objectives are throughout that, but you're always really referring back to the formalized set, mm-hmm. which again, I think typically comes from the charter. That's probably your main document for mm-hmm. setting those objectives and goals.
Yeah, one of the things that happens too is people might struggle a little with the change management. And that's okay. That's human, right? I mean, that's what happens. We need to understand the why before we'll accept the change. And one of the things that we've done is to use those goals and objectives as a way to refer back people back to why we don't want to continue to do something, right? I kind of joked about it, and one some of the other conversations I've been having with our team is about the definition of insanity, right? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Right.
So when we talk about re-engineering a business process, for example, you don't want to necessarily, you want to look at what you're doing today. You don't necessarily want to do what you're doing today because you've got all these new technologies, you've got all this great automation, and in order to stop the insanity, you have to do things differently. And sometimes we'll refer back to those goals and objectives and say, does keeping that process meet our goals and objectives of process efficiency and increasing productivity? And if the answer is no, right, it helps people kind of internalize, okay, I do need to think differently and let go of what I know. It's an uncomfortable place for people to be sometimes, but it's all part of the process, right?
That's right. It's a great way to look at what you're doing now and help determine if it is going to align with what the goals and objectives are, not just for the short term for the project, but also for the long term. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a great opportunity to think outside the box, as long as you're constantly reviewing those processes and things in terms of how well they align.
Mm-hmm.
So it is difficult to change, and it's difficult for people to get away sometimes from the thing that they've always done,
Mm-hmm.
because that thing typically works. You might not see all the things going around in the background and all the manual processes and band-aids that you had to put on to make it work, but they've been using for long enough that it's the process that they know and love. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but going forward, to meet an organization's goals and objectives, which are always changing and always moving forward, those items and those processes might have to be revisited and looked at again. And that's a perfect opportunity to take those and put those up against what the goals and objectives of the organization are and see if it really makes sense to do it that way, or if we can find a more efficient way to
Mm-hmm.
set that up.
Yeah, and to that point, I know that you've sat in on a lot of design sessions. We've done a lot of that together over the years. So not only the kickoff meeting, but even when we're talking about specific process design or we're looking at a module that we're configuring, being able to have the conversation around how does this tie back to those goals and objectives, starting a design session. Because there's people sometimes in those meetings that haven't been privy to the overall objectives or the goals and the charter and those things, and just kind of reminding people what direction the boat's rowing, right?
Right. I think it's quite common to have part or maybe most of the project team not really aware of what the goals and objectives are. A lot of times it'll be stated. Kickoff meetings are a great place to talk about why we're doing the project and what the benefit of the project will be and the purpose of the project. But to really get into discussing what the organization's goals are and what those objectives are within that isn't something that is always effectively communicated. So you have projects that are being planned and designed and built and tested with sometimes just a rudimentary knowledge of what's really the goal. And so it is important, particularly in planning, particularly in design, to be able to understand and have everybody understand what the goals are so that they can use that information to help inform what that design should be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think if you're able to do that, it makes it much more efficient in terms of your design, because you are always in alignment with what the objectives of the project are supposed to be.
Yeah, I'll put on my HR hat for a while and talk about goals and objectives from the employee perspective, right? They motivate people, they keep people moving forward. I think we refer back to them to make sure that they give us guidance. When a squirrel runs by, we don't go chasing the squirrel, right? A lot of times those squirrels can be things like acquisitions, mergers, there's all kinds of things that can happen on projects. So talk to me a little bit about just, some ways or things to think about for people who are in a project. Maybe they're in a project today. It doesn't have to be an ERP project. Maybe it's just a general, smaller type of, interface project or something. Some tips and tricks around how to get the squirrel back in the park and chasing him the right direction.
Well, you're right about the number of different things that can affect that and affect the goals and objectives within a project. Uh, Acquisitions are a perfect example that you may be in discussion for an acquisition, but it's really unknown when that's going to happen or if it's going to happen, but that can have a very serious impact to an organization's direction. You can have misunderstandings around what the goals and objectives should be, whether from not being privy to them and not really having a deep understanding of them, or in some cases, maybe your personal goals don't necessarily align very well with the organization's goals, and that can become an issue. And so there's confusion about what your priorities should be. Any of those things can take a project and set it in a different direction or on a different course. So I think it's important to be really proactive in trying to identify these things. First of all, you've got your risk and issue logs that can identify what some of the potential risks are. And those risks are things that can impact goals and objectives. An acquisition or merger, that's a serious thing. It's a major event, and it can very easily change something. So having that on the radar is key. Things at more of the ground level or an individual level, in terms of maybe not understanding those objectives, that can be mitigated quite a bit by reviewing those at strategic times, phase reviews. It can be mitigated by identifying if there is an issue or if there seems to be some confusion, and then bringing the group together for discussion around those goals. So I look at it as a number of different things that can have impact. The result is really the same. The result is you want to make sure you communicate properly to get everybody's expectations back in line. Now, whether you do that as a group or maybe you do that on an individual or small group basis really depends on what the confusion is or what the issue is. But ultimately, you've got to be proactive in identifying where there might be a discrepancy, and then you've got to communicate that properly and make sure that everybody is back on the same page.
Yep. So the message is communicate a lot and often and in every way possible, right?
The first three bullet points are all communication. It's
Yeah.
communication and communication and communication. Yes.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we've even, in the monthly managers meetings in organizations or some type of, steering committee, you might start that presentation with just to remind everybody, here's our goals and objectives for this project, and it kind of sets the tone for everybody on the same page. But again, I think it's the projects that are well communicated. It gets the teams working together. Everybody's, I call it rowing in the right direction. But for an organization that has gone through the process, particularly on any project, if it's an IT project, they're all expensive. I mean, it takes work and it takes time, and time is money. And so we want to make sure that, folks have the tools to be able to be successful with those projects. So whether it's an interface implementation, a new module, or a full-blown ERP replacement, having some of those best practices in place is going to be key to their success.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, thanks for taking the time with me today. Good stuff. Check out roihs.com, Thought Leadership, and take a look at what other things we've got out there for you. We have this series on the common points of failure. We've got lots of other stuff on Infor and projects in general, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
All right. Thanks.